Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Chris Martius. I'm team leader for climate change, energy and low carbon development in C4 ECRAF. I'm just introducing this session. Unfortunately, I have to run out to another meeting soon after, but I'll be here for the first minutes. So it's my pleasure really to opening this session on scaling smallholder tree-based systems for resilience and carbon removals. And one could almost say this is a sort of tension field between what smallholders need and what the people on the side of carbon removals or thinking about a word like carbon removals even need. Smallholders more worried about adaptation, resilience, eking out a living, and on the other side, the international world trying to find ways to put carbon back into soils, into biomass, and getting it out of the atmosphere quick enough, which is difficult. And so I don't want to preempt too much of what's going on in the meeting. I'm going to hand over to Kennedy, who's our colleague. He's an environmental economist from ECRAF, and he's going to be in charge of the session, and he's going to run you through it. We were hoping to have our CEO, Eliane Ubalijoro, to give you some opening remarks, but we lost her somehow on the campus here, which is easy. She's coming? No, okay. Maybe we start, and maybe she comes in later. So, Kennedy, floor is yours, and yours. Have a good session.
So we are going to start, in the interest of time, I think we are going to start this session, and I wish to invite all our speakers. I think we have 4 of them who will be running us through this session. And I will also be having one of the speakers joining us virtually. So I want to invite Abi and Uja, Dr. Jaite, and Divine. So our first speaker will be putting the agroforestry into the right context. We'll be having Dr. Abi Vanak. He's the director of the Center for Policy Design at Ashoka Trust for Research for Agroecology and Environment, or ATRI. He worked closely on a science policy practice interface in ATRI's key areas of expertise in land, and he has expertise in land conservation, restoration, livelihood, and human well-being. So he'll be taking us through planning tree-based restoration programs at scale, looking at what to plant, where, and why. So, Dr. Abi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kennedy, and for the invitation. And it's a real pleasure to be here to talk to all of you. So I'll dive right in the interest of time. We want to present some of the work that we're doing in India in terms of the framework that we've put in place. So how do you scale up agroforestry and sort of using the motto for TOFI, the trees outside forests in India, the right trees in the right place for the right reason. So tree planting, of course, has gained a lot of popularity amongst all sectors. Everybody wants to plant trees. You know, we've had the Trillion Trees program, and we've got many others. I saw this notice board in one of the hotels here that says 28,000 trees will be planted for every room booked during the COP28. But tree planting as a large-scale measure is not new. In fact, India was a tree planting laboratory for almost 200 years. Here are some of the results and some of the lessons we learned from that. Large-scale tree planting, if not done well, can actually be problematic for several reasons. It can actually cause ecological degradation because native species have often co-evolved with the biodiversity around them, and they serve lots of ecosystem functions. And so not putting the right trees in that place can disrupt some of those. Moving people out of their lands or preventing access to their traditional commons or their traditional forests for large-scale tree planting can lead to dispossession. Planting the wrong types of trees can also actually lead to groundwater depletion in many areas, especially when it comes to deep-rooted or very high-density plantations. So how can we turn this around? As we go forward, what does it mean when we start prescribing what kinds of trees that we want to advocate planting in all of these areas? So the first thing, of course, is the right place. Understand bioregions. Understand what you need to plant based on what's already there. Understand what are the natural drivers of vegetation in those areas. Have a very deep understanding of the water cycle in that area. And in India, of course, there are various bioregions. But the biggest determinant of tree cover is precipitation and temperature. And in the tropical places that most of us want to grow lots of trees in, let's understand that hotter and drier the place is, the less dense the canopy is, so you're not going to achieve rainforest-like densities in dry places. So that's something to keep in mind. Unfortunately, most people seem to forget that. They want to pack in trees as much as possible, and that can actually cause problems. It can cause water stress in those areas, and it's obviously not going to help the trees themselves grow. A popular myth, of course, is that if you plant more trees, it'll increase rainfall. This is what we were taught growing up, but it's not as simple as that. There is a trade-off between water security and carbon sequestration. Broad-scale climate patterns determine vegetation type, and open ecosystems tend to have a different trade-off between groundwater recharge and transpiration evaporation. So the denser the canopy in those areas, the more rainfall is required. Well, obviously it's correlated. You can't get dense canopies without more rainfall. But if you were to artificially irrigate, then actually resulting in lower groundwater recharge in those places. So there is a trade-off between water security and carbon sequestration. This is something that most people tend to forget when planting, when designing large-scale tree plantation programs. Let's also not forget that above ground carbon is not the only kind of carbon. In fact, most carbon is stored below ground. And dry ecosystems, such as deserts and semi-deserts and tropical savannas, for the amount of rainfall that they get, actually store as much carbon below ground as forests do, at least the tropical forests do. So this is something to keep in mind. Below ground carbon is very important. It's more stable, less likely to be destroyed in a fire, given that we are experiencing increasing heat waves and drought conditions the world over. What's the right reason then for planting trees? Well, it's important that we design for equity. Keep a whole range of stakeholders in mind and mitigate risks to the most vulnerable people that are out there. Understand these offsets. Who's benefiting from the carbon credits? Are the local landholders benefiting? Are the landless people benefiting from in those villages that you're trying to do large-scale tree plantations? Who are the winners and losers from this transaction? And who gets to decide which species of trees are planted in these areas? Is it large-scale companies who are buying the credits? Is it large-scale companies who are doing the plantation? Or can we have a dialogue with local stakeholders to ensure equitable benefits or the benefits are spread more equitably? And there are frameworks for this, and I won't go into too much detail on this. Some of this is available. We're going to hand out some brochures as well for all of you to read, so you can take a look. But there are ways, there are frameworks for navigating these trade-offs. So it's important for us to look at that before we start this work. And then, of course, what's the right tree to plant in these places? That's something that's really important, and there are broad-scale principles for tree planting programs that we need to keep in mind. We have to make sure that we know what the local land use systems are and who the user groups are. A lot of times, landed people tend to make the decision about what trees to plant, and often commons get used for tree plantation programs, whereas the landless people who use these commons for grazing their livestock are left out of the equation, are left out of the decision-making process. So So it's important to include a wide range of stakeholders. Then what is the intended function of this vegetation? Is it single use? Is it only for carbon credits? Is it only for fuel wood? Is it only for pulp? Or is it going to be mixed use? These are all questions that need to be thought of. And consider the biophysical variables. You can't have this. The same species of trees won't grow in the valley and in the mid-slope and on the hilltop. You'll need different species, a whole mix of species to grow there. Otherwise, you won't get the benefits that you thought you will. So it's important to keep all of these things in consideration when planning these programs. Target ecosystem productivity and biodiversity when planning these programs. Fast-growing native pioneer species with high productivity are usually recommended for the initial stages of planting. Try and avoid putting exotic species in there because, like I mentioned earlier, there might be a clash between what you want to do and what you'll achieve. And remember the socioeconomic context. Most importantly, understand some of the drivers of degradation. And if you want this to succeed in the long term, then people who are living there, who are the stakeholders, need to co-own this effort because they need to see the effort, the benefits accruing directly to them in the long run. Water is going to be one of the biggest constraints for our push for decarbonization using via any scale of carbon sequestration or tree planting programs. And so it's really important for us to map possible sources of water, how much is needed for plantations. Try and understand the watershed, plan accordingly. Create the watershed budget, understand who's going to benefit. Again, there are always trade-offs in all of these, so understand who's going to lose out if you're going to use a lot of water for your tree plantations. There are a whole bunch of tools that you can use. Anuja is going to talk about this a little bit later. There's, for example, in India, we've developed something called Jal Toll. Jal is water, Toll is balance, so Jal Toll. It's a water auditing facility. You can use this kind of tool, or you can develop others. And finally, you can put it in a broader framework, trying what steps to follow. So I've just outlined some of these things here, but there are many frameworks that can help you make these decisions better. It's useful to think of these before you start these programs. So I'll end my talk here, and I don't know if you want to take questions now or afterwards. Okay. Thank you so much.
Round of applause for his presentation. So thank you so much. I mean, those are critical points, issues around having the right tree, the right reason in the right place. Okay. So she can have a quick presentation. Okay. Can come to questions. Okay, so apologies for that. And with the indulgence, I wish to disrupt the program just a little bit. We have the C4E-Craft CEO. She was supposed to come at the beginning of the session making introduction remarks. So please, Eliane.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry for disrupting the program. I'm running from getting my 20,000 steps in, getting from one place to another today. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and I know you're also doing your 20,000 steps and need to go to places. So just want to say, grateful that you're here with us. It's a real pleasure to open this session on scaling smallholder tree-based systems for resilience and carbon removals. I'm looking forward to the sharing of the distinguished panels of experts today, all of whom are based either in Africa or Asia. And this should come as no surprise because these two continents are also where you will find the vast majority of the world's smallholder farmers and the world's population. Africa and Asia together represent 80% of the world's population. The farmers in these two continents are the backbone of our food systems, producing a third of the world's food. Africa and Asia are also where C4E-Craft happen to have been based for decades through our two headquarters in Kenya and Nairobi in Bogor, Indonesia. We also have offices in more than 20 countries across both regions. Combined with our offices in Europe and Latin America, we pioneer innovative ways to achieve sustainable land management. Our work is focused on 3 global issues where trees can make a difference: biodiversity, climate, and food. And though we face challenges in safeguarding biodiversity, stabilizing the climate, and ensuring food security, there are solutions. One solution, proven through research, on-the-ground expertise, and lived experience from communities, particularly stands out. It shows us how to combat these crises in an integrated and cost-effective way. That solution is agroforestry. It's an old practice, one that ICRAF has championed since its founding in 1978. And agroforestry not only has an impressive history, it also has a bright future. There is now an urgent global need to scale tree-based systems on smallholder farms. This practice plays a critical role in countering negative impacts of maladapted land management, especially from poor agricultural practices. Agroforestry supports more than 1.2 billion people globally. It plays a vital role in carbon removals through carbon sequestration and carbon sinking. It builds organic carbon content in soil, and it promotes avoided deforestation and land degradation, helping countries meet their national determined contributions within the framework of the Paris Agreement. About 85% of NDCs now mention agroforestry as a strategy for meeting unconditional targets. Yet different policy, technical, and financial barriers still constrain the development of agroforestry systems, especially in developing countries. And this is where C4ICRAF can help. We are the world's leading research organization in the field of agroforestry, a tried and tested approach involving farming in forests and at forest margins and tree crop production. C4ICRAF helps transform how land is used and how food is produced. It works together with governments, indigenous peoples, and local communities to develop the tools they need to better conserve and restore ecosystems and to respond to climate, malnutrition, biodiversity, and desertification crises. We recognize that achieving equity and inclusion is essential for the success of our work. As an organization, we draw on a vast body of local wisdom and traditional knowledge from all over the planet. We work together with many traditional farming communities to cultivate tree species in combination with agricultural crops. And we work with farmers, governments, as well as research and training institutions to provide evidence for the multiple benefits of agroforestry. This work is urgent. And this work isn't possible without robust partnerships and knowledge sharing. In Africa, C4ICRAF is leading the Regreening Africa project with support from the European Union. It is restoring over 1 million hectares of degraded land on the continent using agroforestry systems and practices in 8 sub-Saharan countries. In the Gambia, C4ICRAF has worked closely with the Environment Ministry to develop the first of its kind national agroforestry strategy. Presents strategic policy guidance to promote agroforestry. Consequently, over 1,000 smallholder farmers in the Gambia have adopted farm-level agroforestry protocols, and they're implementing these as a result of collaboration between our organization, the Environment Ministry, and other national institutions. This is the power of groups who are deeply committed to transformative change. And this is what gives me confidence that we can make a difference. And that difference starts with the tools we have at hand. This is the key to scaling tree-based systems on smallholder farms. So without ado, I would like to give back the stage to the speakers, and thank you for this interruption and allowing me to give my remarks. Thank you very much.
Ian, a lot of applause. Thank you so much for those key points. Really looking at agroforestry in terms of addressing multiple challenges and also the role that it's playing among the smallholder farmers. Now, one of the biggest challenges when it comes to agroforestry remains the existing financial models. And our next speaker is going to speak to us about agroforestry and performance-based financing using the case study of cocoa farmers in community forests in Cameroon. So the speaker is Divine Tita. He is a marketing specialist based in C4ICRAF offices in Cameroon. His research and development interest includes inclusive value chain analysis and development, rural enterprises, institutional, transactional costs, among other areas. So Divine, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay. So you've already introduced me. I want to talk about agroforestry in the frontiers of community forests, what we do to carry out tree-based agroforestry, cocoa-based agroforestry systems within the frontiers of community forests. So I think we have some keywords here, which are cocoa. We also have community forest, and then we have Cameroon. So to begin with, I think it's good to print the context. You would see from our slide that Cameroon is amongst the top 5 cocoa producers in the world, with our current production target estimates about 300,000 tons. And government challenge is to reach about 600 tons by 2025, but we are in 2023, we are just still at 600. So our current yield is about 300 to 500 kilograms per hectare. It depends on where you are and who the farmer and what you do. You can get between 300 to 500, but others get right up to 800 kilograms per hectare. So you ask the question, why are others doing well and others not doing well? You will see also from the slide that we have the red line shows the current yield for cocoa, which has remained somehow constant over the past, we can say 40 to 50 years. It has remained constant. You see that the red line is almost horizontal. But you also realize that the gray line is showing production, which means that production is increasing over time. And the blue line is showing that the surface area cultivated is increasing, which means that production is based more on, increase in production is based on increase in surface area rather than on yields. And you will see also from the slide that there are quite some efforts that the government is making to actually improve these yields and to increase production. So let's go to the next slide and let's talk about the next important point, which is community forestry. Community forest was introduced in Cameroon in the 1995 forestry law, and currently it was meant to include local communities in the sustainable management of forests. And as of now, we have about between 300 to 400 community forests, covering a total area of about 1.8 million hectares. Averagely, a community forest maximum size is about 5,000 hectares. You will see from the map on my left that the green spots indicate the number of community forests that we have in Cameroon, how spread they are. So you see that a concentration of them is around the southeast part of Cameroon. So let's take the case of one of the community forests in which we are working, which is called Askokip, and we present the state of the forest. You will realize, used from the map, that what is going on in the forest, mostly illegal logging, and the yellow, you can see some white spots in the, like asterisks on the map, which indicates some sort of illegal logging that is going on within the community forest. But if you want to dig further, you would see, if you dig further, you will ask what actually is happening in this community forest. We did a survey, a land use, we did some micro-zoning in the community forest last year, and we realized that about 70% of the community forest has been transformed into cocoa farms. And just about 26% is still remaining as forest. So you ask our question, how can you now blend tree crop production with sustainable management of the forest? So we take the case of Grambam. Grambam is where the community forest I just showed is located. And you also see from the Askokip community forest is indicated in yellow. And the map is telling us that there are other community forests within that same area, which is a major cocoa production zone in Cameroon. They produce 25% of the cocoa in the country. So you see from the map that Askokip may not be a unique case. The other community forests within the area may be facing the same challenges. So what is the conclusion we can draw from the maps I've just shown and the land use? You will see that there is great pressure for the conversion of forest land and the community forest into cocoa production. But it may also be that farmers are not getting the economic benefits of managing the community forest. So we said, how can you blend the two, sustainable management of the forest and also enhance sustainable cocoa production? So we came up with this project with the aim of developing some sort of agroforestry, cocoa-based agroforestry within this community forest. So specifically what we want to do, we want to see how we can prevent further conversion of forest land, specifically the community forest, into cocoa. So how can we ask the question, how can we promote long-term productivity of cocoa such that we can better the income of the farmers and also sustainably manage the forest? But we also realize that when we talk about community forests, most of the time it is the benefits go to the men. So we ask ourselves, how can we involve ladies for them? How can we enhance the capacities of ladies in participating in the sustainable management of this community forest? So we think that by developing their business capacity to exploit some of the forests, the products that are in the forest, this may contribute to that. So let me just be brief on one of the activities that we are doing in order to enhance agroforestry. What we do is that we actually promote the integration of other tree crops that have both economic value, but also that provide shade to the cocoa system. So we introduce them with the hope that they are going to intensify income per hectare, not income per hectare, but also increase productivity, because by increasing the trees, a microenvironment or biodiversity is created for the enhancement of cocoa production. So we work with these farmers to actually identify. Abi was talking recently about what type of trees and where to plant it. So we make sure we identify viable trees that have economic value that we integrate into this farming system. We are not saying that these farmers, we know Cameroon cocoa is basically agroforestry based. But what we are saying is that we are not introducing agroforestry to them because they already have it. What we are doing is we are trying to improve the existing system, because some of the trees that they have in their farms, the economic value or the market value is not as rich as maybe some of the species. So if you take for example, avocado, they may have avocado in their farms, but that has not got good market value. So we try to make sure we select the best trees, and we develop nurseries we encourage them to plant some of these trees. So together with them, we identify high-value trees that they can integrate into their farming systems. So, and we don't only identify trees that are useful for men, but we also identify those that are of high value to women. So let us go to the other aspect, which is developing the enterprises. What do we do? Since we realize that women are not actually making a lot of profits from the community forest, we try to help them to come together as group and develop their business plans and then gather some of these products and increase the value, which may be either place or product value, that is transferring them to markets to sell. So these are the type of things we do with the ladies. So what we do in developing these enterprises is that we work with the ladies using the performance-based finance system, which is basically something that we tried last year within another context, which is about, we say we support the ladies in developing their enterprises, but we make sure that the support we give them is based on performance. Based on performance means that we agree together with the farmers that these are the type of indicators we are going to use to evaluate how well we are doing in terms which may be economically, environmentally, or socially. Environmentally, maybe the number of trees they integrate into their farms. Socially, maybe what they do with the monies they generate from the products they gather from their farms. But also, we make sure that they put emphasis on actually identifying or documenting what is happening in their farms so that they don't just work in disarray. So this is what we call performance-based finance. And let me give you, this is the last slide, let me talk a bit about one of the enterprises we have. We worked with about three women's group, and we realized that the men who actually depend on the cocoa, when they pay the children's school fees, they are done. So what we do is that we work with the ladies to say, what actually do you spend your money on? So when we did this evaluation, we realized that the averagely per year, they spend between 2.3 million, that should be about $4,000 a year. And we try to identify where does this money come from. So we identified the different sources of income, and we realized that there was an income gap of about $200 or $250. We said, but how do you manage? And that's when we realized that averagely this represents the debts that they have in their various savings and loan groups. So we said, okay, to set the basis for the enterprise, we are going to set a minimum that you have to cover at least those debts by investing more in the non-timber forest products or in the agroforestry products that you integrate in your farming system. And that's how we came about developing that business plan, at least for the first year, to cover those income gaps. What we also identify is that some of the ladies are getting interested into cocoa production. About 12 out of 45 ladies are already started producing cocoa, which initially was basically a men's activity. So, but we are not here there, we are trying to understand how, to what extent participating in these different value chains actually contribute to the empowerment of these ladies. I think this is what we continue to work on, and we are going to dig further. So I think this should be my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Divine. A lot of applause for his presentation. Yeah, so really connecting the issues of the livelihood and also restoration. So just to note, we shall be having a Q&A session after the presentations. So if you have a question, please just note it down. We'll be coming to that for a Q&A session after the presenters. Now, we are going to look at something different also about the policy perspectives when it comes to agroforestry. And to talk to us about that, we have Anuja Malhotra, I hope I got it right. So she's a policy manager at the Center for Policy Design at Ashoka Trust for Research and Ecology Environment, that is ATRI. So she currently coordinates the implementation of ATRI's grasslands restoration programs as well as policy advocacy for restoration in India. She'll be talking to us about policy barriers and enablers to enhance agroforestry in smallholder farmers. Thank you.
Thanks, Kennedy. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Anuja. I work on public policy and public finance related issues in nature climate solutions in India. Today, I'm going to be talking about what kind of barriers and enablers we've identified for scaling up agroforestry in India, specifically for smallholder farmers. India has been a leader in the sense that we were the first country in the world to have an agroforestry policy and mission. It was, is it working? Yeah, sorry. It was launched in 2015, and there was a significant public finance allocation that was made in India for a mission on agroforestry. However, the uptake on the ground was low. What it means is that while the government allocated funds and finances for agroforestry, it was not taken up by farmers. There was some kind of inertia to move away from the cropping patterns that they had and to move towards tree-based models and agroforestry models. As a result, over the years, the public finance allocation was actually withdrawn, and over the years, the budgetary allocation went down. So far, so forth, that last year it went down by almost 75%. Because it hasn't worked on the ground. So we've been thinking about why that has happened, why despite a public finance allocation and a policy and a mission, it hasn't worked. The Trees Outside Forest in India, it's a project funded by USAID, and we're part of the consortium. As part of that study, we've been thinking about what are the barriers that have led to this issue. The first issue that we've identified is that there's lack of diversity and availability of planting material in the first place. The second is that we don't know where the transition finance will come from. So if a smallholder farmer has to move away from their current practice of cropping systems towards agroforestry, whichever crop that is, there will be a reduction in yield for a few years. There will be changes in their income, their livelihoods will get affected by it. And that transition may not necessarily have finance available for it. And the third is that there are hydrological constraints in India. As we know, large parts of India are semi-arid and arid bioregions, and water is a major constraint in those areas. And so we've been thinking about what are the potential enablers that could work towards addressing some of these issues. So we've worked on a few tools. One of them is a decision support tool for restoration that should address the issue of lack of diversity. We've been thinking about how payment for ecosystem services can be operationalized to address the issue of lack of transition finance that's available. And we've been working on tools that can help assess the carbon-water trade-off that exists and to be able to address the hydrological constraint. So, for example, some of the potential tools that we've been working on for scaling up agroforestry. First is a tool called D4R, that's Diversity for Restoration. It's again in the collaboration and with partners under the TOFI consortium. The idea is that if an individual is able to feed in information related to the location, the site conditions that they're in, the restoration objectives that they have, the tool will be able to tell them what are the species that they should be planting, in what density, and whether or not it's appropriate to be doing that. This is underway. What we want to do eventually is to also able to link it to the market, which means that what are the species that are available in those areas, and if the tool can also tell you that this is what's available and this is what's appropriate, so this is probably what you should do. So by giving farmers a tool to be able to decide what is appropriate for their land and what's going to yield them good results, that's one way to enable smallholder tree farming. The second is a water budgeting tool that my colleague Abhi in his previous presentation spoke about a little bit. It's called Jal Tol. Jal is water, Tol is balance. It's a free open source water accounting tool, and the idea is that it'll make water balance estimation for a community. Through Jal Tol, partners can identify and implement interventions that will not stress the available water in that area, which is important because, as we all know, recent studies have shown that if tree planting and nature-based solutions are done mindlessly, they can actually become a stressor on the groundwater in the region. So it has happened in the past that fast-growing species have been planted, and that has actually led to reduction in water tables in that area. As a country, we cannot afford to do that. We are water scarce. We are in the semi-arid and arid zone. So water has to be accounted for before any decisions related to cropping patterns are made. And so this is a tool that can actually enable that. Now the question that we've been grappling with is how do we use these tools that tell us something about appropriate ecosystem services, and how do we link it to payments and compensations that farmers should get for climate-friendly practices. So while for payment of ecosystem services in India, there are site-level successes that are there. They may not necessarily be there for agroforestry, but we do know that there's some experience that India has with PES related to prevention of forest fires, related to watershed development, related to stabilizing shifting sand dunes and so on. However, there's currently no mechanism that has worked on agroforestry, so far as we know, for payment of such ecosystem services. And so what we've been thinking about and what we are working on going forward is that can we come up with an incentive structure that would benefit farmers for ecologically responsible actions. So for example, if there are farmers currently who are growing very water-intensive crops in India, such as growing rice in arid zones, which is quite common once irrigation is available. Can PES incentivize them to actually move away from those heavy crops towards agroforestry? Can we think about compensatory funding to help them achieve a decent livelihood for protecting ecosystem services? And so, how will those payments be factored in? Most importantly, our question is, how do we link landscape level ecological outcomes with measurable actions that individuals are doing? Because we know that in India, land is fragmented, farming, agriculture, it's very fragmented. The average farm size is less than 1 hectare in India. What that means is that outcomes might be for a greater landscape, while there might be individual people who are responsible for doing it. And we know that the minute intermediaries come in, the minute agencies come in, we don't know what actually ends up with the farmer. So we've been thinking about examples of trying to make this work. So for example, we're coming up with an agro-biodiversity index, which will again look at some inputs from your data and tell you that the farm is on a scale of 0 to 10, how agro-biodiverse it is. And then can we use that scale to actually pay farmers for investing in agro-biodiversity? So these are some of the things that we are thinking about and going forward are our priority. It seems a little complex to address, especially in terms of public finance for a large country like India, where there are multiple bioregions and multiple priorities for different states and so on. However, there is precedent where in India, climate-friendly practices have been linked to budgetary allocations. So for example, our Finance Commission gives tax benefits to states which has a higher tree cover. So while tree cover is not necessarily the best indicator of biodiversity and ecosystem services, it's a starting point to say that we are linking green cover to budgetary allocations. Similarly, recently, a new scheme was launched in India that aims to provide cash incentives to cut use of chemical soil fertilizers. Again, what that means is you're incentivizing protecting a certain ecosystem service, protecting soil, organic carbon, and other nutrients. And so we feel that there is some sort of precedent that links finance to protecting ecosystem services. The question for us now is how can that be done for agroforestry and how can that be done specifically for smallholder farmers? And so what we are working on is trying to embed payment for ecosystem services for such policy incentives. So the examples that I just spoke about, by addressing the issue of water availability through a tool called Jal Toll, which is water balance, by thinking about transition finance through payment of ecosystem services, and diverse planting through tools like diversity for restoration. Our aim is to be able to drive land use that's socially and ecologically sustainable. And drawing on from the previous speakers, and because we are specifically talking about smallholder farmers, it's extremely important that we keep social considerations, issues of tenure in all our project design and framing, and that has to be linked to policy as well. I will stop here. A lot of this work has been done by my colleagues at ATRI and the TOFI team, so I'm just here on behalf of them, and I'm happy to take any questions if there'll be there. Okay. Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, really looking at what are some of these barriers that that constrains agroforestry implementation, but also looking at the brighter side of it, which is what are the enablers that we could tap into, including the blended finances, payment for ecosystem services, having a good policy environment, but also developing technological tools that could help us in terms of on how best we can do it. Now we are moving from there just to talk a little bit about how now do implement agroforestry at scale. And to do that, we have Dr. Mlading Jaite. He will be sharing with us about the Gabi experience on large-scale ecosystem-based adaptation project. This is a project that is funded by GCF, and it aims to restore over 10,000 degraded landscapes of land and to benefit over 11,000 beneficiaries. So, Dr. Jaite, please.
Very good afternoon, and really thank you for coming. Yeah, I mean, I will try to be as quick as possible given the time limitations, but I wish I had 2 days to explain about this project. But essentially, this is a restoration, or I would say an adaptation project that is funded by GCF and implemented by the Ministry of Environment in the Gambia. Of course, right from the start, we had ICRAF, World Agroforestry, as one of our technical support, primarily to help us through issues that really require some science base. And I will quickly try and summarize much of what we do. As you can see, the accredited entity is UNEP, and of course the Ministry of Environment as the executing, but the Department of Agriculture, Forestry, Department of Parks and Wildlife, Department of Community Development, all became part of the implementing agency. And of course, after some 5 years of implementation, we have agreed that aircraft deserve to be ranked not just the TA, but really implementing partner in many ways. So when we started, the idea was to restore up to 12,000 hectares. First it was 10, and then we rounded up to 12,000. And then, of course, this including 3,000 hectares of agricultural lands. So the degraded areas in general, how do we bring back more trees? Of course, at the same time, the project also realized that you can't do all of that without bringing some form of alternative livelihoods, some social support system that will help people to generate enough funds, enough livelihoods, without really going back to the old ways of extracting more forest material, primarily wood. So the project ended up having 3 main components: the restoration of the ecosystems, the support for the establishment and promotion of natural resource-based enterprises, as well as policy support that to help the government and in many ways really create the environment in order to be able to succeed especially for the long term. So we did 3 big things right from the start, and that is the baseline study, which ICRAF really led. This is really to assess the NR base, natural resource base, and also see how populations are utilizing these resources, and where the deficits are, also where the opportunities are. We also went through an economic study that, in a sense, was trying to identify what type of NR businesses could be established successfully with the limited funds we have, and that way, populations can quickly get on, in a way, just diversionary tactics. So before the trees get big enough, this transition period is often very difficult to manage. The third one is really we ended up going to communities themselves, sat down with them to ensure that their ideas and skills as well as knowledge is taken into consideration when it comes to tree management in general, as well as the business part of things. So we call that protocol development, and that really also had to take into account the input of women, because the project said we should have at least 50% women beneficiaries, which is simple to say since we have 52% of the population as women, but hard to get when it comes to doing projects that are land-based, given the fact that women don't own land directly. So that alone disadvantaged them, but we had to find creative ways to really manage this target. So the economic thing really came back with 2 big things. One is the water situation. It's always a water balance issue when it comes to especially Western Sahel. The Gambia is among them, where much of our rainfall now, is below 1,000 millimeters. Of course, it's very high in some parts of the world, but given even during my lifetime, really, rainfall went from 1,200 average to under 1,000, which is really huge. But there are other areas where you don't have more than 3.5 months of the year suitable for tree growing. So that, of course, really had to inform our efforts in order to really succeed. The temperature issues too, in terms of climate in general, as to what works and what will work, trying to help inform our tree selection. Then when it came down to the protocol development, we had to also make sure that we take into account all the stakeholders. It is not enough to go to a community and talk and deal with them without looking at what other institutions are within the communities, for instance, schools, as well as other public places where we can actually do tree management. And this is really how we ended up putting in place protocols for many things, from agroforestry all the way down to schoolyard planting, in order to really boost the situation. So right from the start, in terms of the restoration, we went quickly for ways to generate more seedling stock, because really at the start of the project, there aren't enough infrastructure at all in place in order to help provide the seedlings that are needed for an ambitious project such as this, in terms of having material for up to 10,000 hectares. So we ended up constructing about 9 nurseries. The Gambia is not a big place, so many of these are strategically located so that no community is more than 50 kilometers from a nursery, and that also helped. We also looked at the various places where trees can be planted, and of course, from homes to schoolyards, then to farmyards, and then to community forest. We started looking at each of these, and the community forest system also is well established in the Gambia, and we worked around 53 of established community forests, both in terms of enrichment planting as well as supporting the natural regeneration. The other part that came out with maybe a year or two after we started was the mangrove component. We have these vast areas that were at one time freshwater, and over the last 50 years have turned into saltwater marshes and abandoned rice fields. So we decided perhaps we can try mangrove planting, and that, of course, came out to be very promising and successful. The agroforestry part was what's interesting, because when we first started, we were very modest. We said no more than 300 farmers, because we don't know exactly how farmers will, given the land tenure issue. The Gambia's land tenure system is driven primarily by the customary land tenure, and that means you can work on it until you die, and the next one comes and take over. You can't own it, and you cannot use it for business transactions. And one of the big no-nos from time immemorial is you cannot plant trees. Weird, but you cannot plant trees on our communal land unless and until we all approve of it. Because it is seen that once you plant the trees, it may take over the economic use of the place. And it was sensible at the time, but now that everyone wants to bring back trees, we've got to find a way to get around that. So what we ended up doing is to identify within the communities folks who we know own the land and there is no dispute. That is, perhaps by luck, they were raised as single in terms of male, and got the land transferred to them, and they have no other thing but transfer it to their own kids. Or sometimes people go into money transaction and buy. Over the last 20, 35, 50 years, that also is coming up. So those who can prove they own the land, we can support and work with. Those who cannot prove, we try to stay away, because we know it could bring in some conflict. And that really helped. So we are able to identify 1,057 farmers across the 65 communities, and we were able to work with them to identify what species to plant, where to plant, and we also brought in the incentive system that, performance-based in a way that you have to use our method of planting, which is really creating zai pits in order to enhance water capture. Because we realize that without the zai pits, many of the trees are dying. And then, of course, we went to the point of fencing or protection, but eventually we settled in for farmer protection. That is, find ways to protect. After 1 year, we try and come in, assess, no damage, we compensate for your hard work. And they realize that the best is not to put metal fence like the one we have up there, but just, some of you notice, we have 1 or 2 where you have cloth actually being used as a way of protecting, and just women have wrappers, and there are thousands of old wrappers, so reused just as tree protection fencing. And it worked very well because if it's not seen, it doesn't exist for many of the ruminants. So after that, we of course had to go through to assess, and so far we've noticed that there has been a great response in terms of the trees coming back, because one of the community forest protected areas that was initially done with these, we did assessments and up to 50% success in many cases without any fencing, in the wild. So the other aspect is, of course, bringing in livelihood systems supports that will help reduce the stress in terms of the need to go back and cut down more trees. So we developed beekeeping enterprises. We also worked on guinea fowl enterprise development, as well as harvesting grass for the market fodder. And that also is slowly seeping in, because these are not traditional at all. You will not find any of these things. Even beekeeping, we were the first to supply Europe through Cadamosto in 1450, beeswax from the Gambia. But there is no beekeeping tradition. It's just bee harvesting tradition in the wild. So management, domesticating them is not easy, and because for good reasons, they kill. So we're working with women in women's skill centers too, because that we believe is also a good way of boosting the local economy without actually depending on forest harvest. And food processing is a big part of it, because many of the women are into gardening, are into even agroforestry farms. Whatever comes, we need to process more. And that, of course, has taken up a big dimension, because not only did we establish processing centers at local levels where we call them multipurpose centers, we also are building a main central facility that will be an aggregation center for the whole region. That way there will be an established system that we rely on many things, including including standards, because you cannot have some of these processes also, especially for the value addition, more productive if you don't have standards established. So we have developed national standards for baobab, for honey, for moringa, as well as our own local tea leaves that are available, and they've been within the market, but they are more or less not processed to levels that they could be exported. And that's really some of the ways to maintain, of course, the trees we are planting. Our own target is really to have more trees. But you cannot do that without making sure people have other important things too, including, of course, the daily food. So the project overall worked in at least 180 communities, 65 of which had community forests, and another 50 with schools and baobab groves, woodlots, and many different things that came up. And really, this is the distribution across the country. Of course, challenges always exist. Our biggest are 2 big ones, or 3, that are very hard to remove. Fires. There is almost every year annual fires across the country. Sometimes across even last year in particular, across someone's agroforestry farm where he lost is 700 cashews. I mean, individual farmer worked so hard to put everything up and went to the city for a few days and got a call in the midnight that, oh, sorry, there was fire and the whole thing burnt down. That's expensive and we have to really do something about it. Firewood and charcoal use is faster than the rate of growth, and we are already in a deficit mode, and that is not going to help if we are to really succeed in the long term. And of course, transhumance, which we already did a national dialogue on that with World Agroforestry. This is a very complex problem. Sahel is, I would say, endemic when it comes to transhumance practice, livestock moving from east to west or from north-south. North-south meaning Gambia, Senegal, Senegal, Gambia. It's back and forth. And now the pressure is on the Gambia because the whole of northern Senegal is totally below, in terms of natural resources. So Gambia is their watering point. Gambia is their grazing area during the dry season I would say from now. In fact, already they are there the last 2 months. From October all the way through June, it is the Gambia. And much of that now is so stressed that they had to climb big trees to cut down the branches in order to feed the animals. And that's causing a lot of chaos. Of course, not good for us. And then the third one is, to really help or to make it easy for people to adopt practices that are alien to them. Things like beekeeping. You had to go through a lot of time and training and, awareness creation. So it is not as simple as bringing in, nicely built beehives. No. So we realized that many projects before us did that, and they never had anyone using them. In fact, some had stacks of beehives in their backyard. The reason is they don't know how. So how do you trap the bees? Can you tell me that the bees are not going to kill me and my family? That kind of mental state, you have to help them. And we employed, CSOs who are able to do that, help them learn how to manage. And now many communities are comfortable. And interestingly, our big beekeepers are the women folk. They were never included at the onset, but later on, women are the ones who can easily manage. It's just like tending to the goats. They bring in the water, they manage, and they realize there is no real big deal. When the bees come to know you, they don't harm you, and that is really one good take home for us. And definitely, I thank you. It's been a little bit long, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jaita. A lot of applause. Yeah, really connecting the whole issues of restoration to nature-based enterprises to the policy and institution strengthening. Now, we are going to fly all the way from Gambia to India, and we have our Dr. Chandra, who is simply going to tell us why agroforestry is the ultimate solution. Dr. Chandra is the C4E Country Director in India, and also an accomplished scientist with broad experience in executing agroecosystem research and development across Asia, Africa, and America. Dr. Chandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kennedy, and thank you, colleagues. Unfortunately, I couldn't come over there, so they're saving some carbon footprint. And what I can do is all the previous speakers spoke so well about the need of the agroforestry, why in policy, investment, and core learning. So I'll just go through some of these visuals of why it's important, why collective actions is necessary. So when looking into the present state of where the COP28 held and the subsequent COP20 held, at least in the dry areas of the world, and water has become one of the important the commodity or the life support system. And even 7,000 years ago, in India felt that why trees are so important for the water scarcity or water security. And this is what they're looking into. A tree is equal to nearly 10,000 ponds. That's what the Matsya Purana says. That taking to that context of the trees to the life and water scarcity they're facing the world at the moment. I mapped this one water scarcity per capita and almost like around 3 years ago, and it's very prudent that's become the more widening gaps in the water scarcity especially in the non-tropical dry areas. So taking to that context up, why it's so important, and interplay of the agroforestry and tree outside the forest that for the food, water, carbon, and climate economy. And we set in India, I set up the target of about like a 33%. Why 33% is also the one of the questions many times people asking me. So looking into the groundwater recharge. So because of the huge soil compactness and loss of the soil fertility, I'm sure that you lot heard about the ICRAF talk on the soil health in the last couple of days. And that's very prudent that, so you need to have a more healthy soils and sponge. And in order to do that, we need to have the more canopy cover, especially perennial canopy cover. It's very, look into that one, like when looking into the amount of the green cover increased in terms of the parent vegetations or perennial and tree cover, their groundwater recharge, the increases. So there's a subsurface runoff became a subsurface flow. That's where intermediate tree cover is going to play a vital role in agriculture. It's not just only the waters of the perspective, but also reducing the synthetic use and also carbon the removal reductions. So this is where the agroforestry became a vital. So this is looking just a giving of the example of one of the landscape here, and having the systematic combination of the right crops and the trees and the soil health combined together in the system approach, and every water that fall on the ground, it is absorbed into the soil, hold in the subsurface flow. I think that's what this talk about. So at least about 50% of the surface runoff became a subsurface flow. That's what we call we reach the food, water, and climate security for all. And that's the context you're looking at that when the world is facing, especially all the intensive agricultural system is the compactness, soil compactness, because of three reasons. One is the loss of the tree cover. Second is the loss of the biodiversity, cropping systems, and feedback loops. And third is the high intense use of the synthetic fertilizer. That leads to the high compactness. Any water comes basically is runoff, surface runoff, and hardly that. That leads to the consequences of the drought, desertification, and degradations. So looking at that context, looking at the system approach, how the agroforest is a kind of green deal. So in the last 30 years or so, we are most focused on the yield-centric and few commodities and only the monocropping systems. In that process, looking at the only productions and somewhat looking at the services, but we lost the structure and functions. And this diversity of the crops, trees, animals in the agroforest system that build the structure and functions. In the ecological term, functions, the production follows functions. When they restore the functions through the interventions of the trees into the landscape and service in the world become by default. This is what we're talking about, the diversity, the gut biome of the human beings to the animal, even talk about the livestock in the methane, but this again linked to the how they're grazing, what kind of food the animals and human beings are eating. So that's really bringing it to the grow more health per acre, the framework we call about the one health or one system and system approach. It's very clear that how the healthy soil and the trees are interlinked each other in order to whether look at nature friendly farming to the nature friendly the food system, the way we produce, consume the dispose, that often linked to the functional food systems. Look at the SDG in terms of the SDG and the healthy ecosystems linked to almost every SDGs. So that's what very important to that one. Putting the water in the center, connecting the connections of communities' power. I think that's what the agroforest can able to restore, and why the scaling is domain. Often, when I'm back to India after nearly about 20 years and looking at the different aspect of the system here, one often synonymously look in the agroforest means the timber. Timber means few the monocropping systems. I thought not that one. The agroforest is much behind that one. Timber is just one part of that one. Looking non-timber forest produces whether the food nutrition, then like now looking into the blending of the agroforestry into the coal to the bioenergy and fodder. That's also become one of the vital forces of the tree-based fodder and the fiber. Nature moving to the natural fiber become one of the important aspect, and also the biofertilizer. How the interventions of the leguminous trees into the mainstream agriculture that can introduce the nitrogen applications and also the more income. So looking at that aspect. Also the ecosystem services, soil health, carbon erosion, spring sets, that's become, we lost most of the spring sets in the entire landscape, not just only the forest, the agriculture, but also forested landscape. So that you need to bring back the spring set, that's where the agroforestry go into the vital floors, where the 5 pillars of that to look the biodiversity, carbon, and soil health and equity and inclusion. So this one you putting into the healthy ecosystem, that is the a synonymous to the sustainable agroecosystem, the agroforestry and agrocultural transitions, is supporting provisioning and regulatory culturally the aspect. So why it's very prudent now? We talk a lot about the restoration, regeneration, resilience. That's the restore functional fact that combine production, consumption, conservation, restoration, significant co-benefit to the people, culture, and nature, and the nations. And this really bring back the bend the curve, so that in the last the hundreds of years we lost maximum amount of the sustainable resilient landscape where the trees used to be the kind of a functional food systems, and somewhat some wake up we started conservation a little bit, still hitting the 1.2 degree the Celsius, but we need to bring it to the like India's target of the 33% by 2030 and Atmanirbhar, what we call a self the reliance, the reliability, the next to the net zero by 2070. Until we bring the agroforestry tree outside the forest the program into the as a kind of a addressing the root causes, not just only the symptom. I think that is the what we're going to achieve. That's where we're going to the restore, and that needs to be linked to the until you link ecology to economy, it's not going to you can work on the sustainable farming systems, so that restoration, regeneration is linked to the revenue generation, rewards and recognitions, because of farmers what they can harvest and sell only get it, but what they cannot harvest in terms of ecosystem services, whether biodiversity conservation, carbon sequestrations, and ecosystem service in terms of water security, that not paid for that, including the fresh air. So this is what they need to be quantify them. What we did this one, like why the mass scaling is required. We did some of the experiment earlier, that one when I was working the dry areas of the world, and now looking at this one like a kind of a how monocropping systems are made. It yield in the every year like how much the yield revenue is coming to in terms of the Indo species, about the 60K making it, but you can bring the multifunctional agroforestry systems, looking at really about the 500K that's coming. Even the third year is going to be the 60K, but look at the other benefits you're going to add, whether the carbon cycle, water, temperature, other benefit are not accounted, just only revenue generated by this, the multifunctional food systems, that can really bring the more dimension. This is where we need to be just one farmer adopting this kind of system is not going to help, because of you are a very smallholder farming systems. You need to at least hundreds of thousands of farmers adopting the system, so that aggregation happens. For example, only farmers planting a few trees, and because different type of trees that are the different functional system they're practicing, but the one comes aggregation, they're not going to cope up with the larger share of the market and export potential. I think this is what required. At least when we did it about 1 acre, 5 acre, 10 acre, 100 acres, we found that 100 acres is minimum required in order to make economically ecologically sustainable framework. So it's very clear that when you map the entire India into the tree deficit landscape, nearly of the 68% of the farms are the tree deficits, and most of the farmers the farming the seasonal the practices. So most of the times land is the left fallow and is completely the exposure to the albedo and high heat, the exchange and volatilization of the soils. This is what required a rate specific and context specific species, and the combination of the not only the trees and the livestock, and also the how the people inclusion in the process is going to have the play. This is what you bring, the natural economic zones need to be created so that we can make it scalable. Just look into the one, anyone can guess what it is. It is just a farming system like a monocrop, the rice-based system, but every farm is a kind of bearing a fingerprinting. So that you can mapping that one, what the context, what's the one thing is common, even a lot of diversity in terms of the gestation period of the crops, or a staggered planting, or a residue burning, or the fallows. But one thing very common, look at the borders. Nothing is there. It's just left empty. And when just to do the curiosity, map into those all those the farm, what happens? Taking just small example of the Dewa district in the MP, we mapped all the farm boundaries, and length of the farm boundary is nearly about the 3 lakhs kilometer, and we can put the 4 meter of the planting on the bund planting that really is about nearly 19 to tree cover. What is required? Just 1/3 of the tree planting of that entire bunch that meets of the national targets. I think this is what required a systematic site-specific integration of the trees into the mainstream agriculture. And I'm giving a few of the evidences what we have done that one. This is even like a 500-meter rainfall areas, what we call as a ridge zone, the completely like a rain shadow areas. But adopting the systematic agriculture practices with the trees and regenerative practices, that really help us to nurture the soil and produce the enough food and breaking the myth of the longest is agroforestry. That's the agroforestry growing the nutrition throughout the year, then generating employment and reducing the migration. So this is what you need to looking into the ecological approaches of the conventional approaches compared into the two mixed system like monocrop, the horticulture of the pomegranate with other mixed trees of the mangoes, guavas, and the also natural farming in the combinations. It's very evident that one. So the agroecological approaches really works well, and that reduces the input cost, also the more return of investment. So there is we're heading towards the net zero, the practices, and bringing the agroforestry, the food, fodder, fuel, fiber, fertilizer, and health and the wellness, the system. And we are a lot of the species underutilized. We need to bring back to the mainstream agriculture. That's a functional production system that leads to the what you call the system approach here you talk about, and green growth. This is the one of the things within the framework of the agroforestry and the tree outside the waste framework, how to bring them all the components together, whether the food productions and water security and health of the soil, health of the people, health of the farmers, and also continuity of the production throughout the year. I think that's what need to be generate more employment, also the environmental security and sustainable the growth is going to happen. I think this is the landscape. We need to look at the monocropping systems adopt that bring back to all the healthy ecosystems and related the provisions. And you need to adopt a systematic way from the individual farming system to the landscape level to the regional and global scale. How that scaling is going to be adaptive transformations, how the digital tools and technology are going to the adapt. So our CEOs clearly mentioned that we have to bring them together, the integrated approaches. A lot of things happening, whether to AI, ML, and big data at a crop level, tree level, animals, soils, water, agronomy, and weather. But what is required? A meta-analysis, clubbing them together as inclusive agroecosystems to reach out what you call interoperability of the sustainable development. And this is where the digital augmentation of the agroforestry and tree outside of industry required. So as Anuja and the Abhi also mentioned earlier that what is why the being the agroforestry in place for almost like 8 years or so, why it's not really taken off because of the planting material and identifying the right tree for the right place for the right the reason and the market, and in season practice reduce the input cost, and what you can do the post harvesting, how linked to the market. I think this is the pre-planning to in season activities to the post harvest advisories, and also the monitoring the impact on the agroforest and the scale and social outreach is going to happen. I think this is where the digital technology railways we are developing a number of things as the ICRAF and CIFAR level at the context of taking into the account of how to make a ecologically sustainable, economically viable landscape. And this is what I'm giving simple example that like a carbon, I'm sure like you're talking about the COP28, and carbon is one of the major issues there. And you need to develop a toolkit to measure your individual tree level, what's going to happen, how much the water it can sequester, how much carbon sequester, how much the borders it can host in terms of the microbial from the below ground, above ground, and altogether how much it can give the ecosystem service. We talk a lot about ecosystem services and payments, but we have to shift to the payment per ecosystem service, PS plus. So to measure the small scale level, even individual farmer, industry level, where they can quantify the carbon sequestration potential so that they can give a kind of a better return of investment. So that this is the slide I'm talking about, that what would be the vision for the 2030. That means by 2030, at least 30% of the landscape should be comes under the agroforestry, a tree-based system approach, and the people should adapt to the food systems, and at least 30% of their plate should consist of the fruits and vegetables and the food coming from the sustained agroecosystem. This required a common enabling factor, knowledge augmentations, return of the investment, and that's reached by 2030, and it should be at least half of the landscape comes under the system approach. That's what the target of the 50-50. That is where the completely the net zero, the framework we're talking about. And I close my slide here. That one, a production follows functions. Let's leverage the technology, diversity, local intelligence, indigenous wisdom to rebuild the broken food system for healthy living and planetary health. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chandra. And from India back to Dubai, we have some 5 or so minutes, and we want to have your quick feedback. We have talked about agroforestry contextualization, the financing issues, the policy issues around scaling, and the systems approach was the last presentation. And we want to hear from you. Any quick question, any quick feedback? The floor is open. Yes, please. Do you have some microphone?
Thank you. My name is Sharda. I work with the Analog Forestry Network, and my question is generally to the panel here. You've spoken about agroforestry, you've spoken about resilience building. So I'm curious to know what are the kind of monitoring, evaluation, assessment frameworks, if you have implied already, that kind of assesses your resilience, both ecological and for the human food sovereignty angle. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think I can take that. So we have about 5 minutes. So I think what I'll do is that I will give all the panelists a chance to wrap up. And did you address the question to anyone in particular? Sorry.
I'm just looking for...
Okay.
Because it didn't come out in your presentation, I really don't know who to address it to. So I'm curious if anybody has employed it and if there's something that they can share. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks for that. So monitoring evaluation framework, someone can talk to that. And I also want to give all panelists maybe just a quick minute for any quick thought, any quick feedback as we wrap up. We can start from Divine.
Or monitoring resilience, because most of the projects, as you know, are based on projects. But what we do most of the time is we collect information, baseline, end line, and then we see how this affects farmers' livelihoods, because I think that's the most important thing we tend to measure when we work with farmers. How do what we do contribute in building their resilience and also the resilience of the ecosystems. But what we do most of the time is during project lifespan, we may collect some baseline and then we collect end line. Where necessary, we may also have long-term impact that we may tend to measure depending on the circumstances that we have. Thanks.
Hello. We have a question from one of the virtual participants, Ms. Jyoti Sudhakar Narsude. How soil water movements, hydrological properties, affects on potential of carbon sequestration in agroforestry? That's the question.
Is it only one or we have some more? Or just one question?
We have one more.
Okay.
Yeah, in one of your slides, you said that the project developed a tool, the project that you work with SIAT, that will help the community in terms of developing their strategy in terms of, planting agroforestry and so on. So my question is, how would you consider local knowledge into that? Because they have been doing that for generations, and you come up with a tool that introducing a strategy for them. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That's a great question. I think I did not cover it properly when I was talking about it because, so the tool that we are working on, we don't just want to account for scientific and ecological parameters there. We also want to bring it markets as well as social parameters around it. And that does include what was historically being done in those bioregions and not what an algorithm tells you to do. So it's not that. The idea is that following the Green Revolution in India, a lot of the cropping systems moved towards wheat and rice and monoculture crops. And traditionally, however, we used to do a lot of multi-cropping, agroforestry, and so on. This is all, it was being done historically. So our tool just doesn't account for what an algorithm tells you in terms of soil conditions, slope, and so on. We want to be able to include market and what was historically done as well. So that's all underway. Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks.
My quick comment will be that most of what we are trying to do now is the very early stage of what would definitely become a very long-term process. I mean, tree growing in general takes a long time. and benefits, core benefits that come in also come out as time go, and often these are guided by the context. One of the questions that I'm yet to answer is, what does a restored landscape look like? You know, what will one look like 20 or even 40 years from now, given the fact that we are told by 2080 climate conditions will continue to decline in our part of the world. So what is equilibrium now is not going to be the equilibrium 50 years from now. And these are real issues that science is yet to address. At our own level, that is within the project's time frame, what we notice is some of these interventions bring good, quick returns. For instance, planting in degraded rice fields, that is areas that were one time rice and you have salt now, if you plant mangroves there, within 2 years, you see shellfish coming. Within 3 years, people actually start fishing in the streams. You know, and during the planting, you dare not come in the middle of the day because of the hot water. So those are quick economic gains, but what will happen 20, 30 years from now when the sea level continues to rise, perhaps drowning some of those mangroves? And I mean, it's very hard to say. And I think that is also what's causing the issue of what kind of monitoring or what kind of framework can we develop in order to say this kind of engagement actually will pay off. So generally this is where I think it is for now, but I'm sure things will change over time once we start learning more about it. But certain skills like beekeeping, I think will remain just like cattle farming long, long time after us, you know, so.
Thank you so much. We had just one quick one for Chandra as you wind up. There was an issue about the soil's agroforest's contribution to soil's carbon. Maybe as you make your final thoughts, we could talk about that in the next 1 minute or so. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The question. When look into the agroforestry, and it's kind of a bit of echo. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so what we're looking at this one, like the soil restoration going to happen or soil organic carbon sequestration going to happen, it is the integration of the trees and the multifunctional, the cropping systems and the livestock. So that the crop residue, the return of the crops back to the soil as the return of the functions, and also the leaf litter in terms of whether the green manure, also the dry leaf litter, and also the manure from the livestock. Three things together in the agroforest system is a combination of the trees, livestock, and the crops that really help us to restore the soil. We did just in my presentations, I went over very quickly. There you can really clearly see that within the 3 years, the soil organic, the carbon from the 0.01 to at least reached about 2.5, and in 5 years it reached to about nearly the 4.2. Something that's what required. At least 3% soil organic carbon restores in 4 to 5 years in the functional systems. I think that where the real the restoration going to happen. That's really help the not only the farmers, also the ecosystems in overall.
Thank you so much. We have exactly 0 minutes remaining. So I want to appreciate Divine, Dr. Jaite and Anuja for their quick, for their interventions. 1 round of applause to them. And to all of us, thank you so much for your active participation, and see you in the next sessions. Thank you.